Human societies are built on lines between right and wrong, between justice and crime, between the things we are allowed to do and the things we're not. These boundaries give our world stability, but they also beg the question, what happens if you cross the line? Few writers explore that question more ruthlessly than Fyodor Dostoevsky. In Crime and Punishment, his protagonist, Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, asks a terrifying question. Raskolnikov believes societies are divided into ordinary and extraordinary people, people who obey the law and people who have the birth given rights to violate it. Or, as one of my favorite poets very eloquently puts it,
Irony in action, fractions of honesty divide people into factions, those who will and those who actually will.
the murder of the pawnbroker is therefore not simply a crime, but an experiment. He wants to know which category he belongs to, ultimately collapsing under the weight of his own consciousness. Dostoevsky asks a question that has been long debated across cultures and generations. Do some individuals possess the right to step beyond morality, to cross the line? The 19th century produced three radically different answers to this question.
Doesn't matter what's right. It's only wrong if you get caught. If consequences dictate my course of action, I should play God and just shoot you myself.
Raskolnikov believes humans are divided into ordinary and extraordinary. If such extraordinary individuals exist, Raskolnikov reasons, history should already provide examples. Figures who violate moral laws and reshape entire civilizations. One name stands above all others in his imagination: Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon wages wars, spills blood, topples governments, and yet history remembers him not merely as a criminal, but as a revolutionary. For Raskolnikov, this suggests a disturbing possibility. Perhaps some individuals truly possess the right to transgress. Perhaps the line that binds ordinary people does not apply to them. So he decides to test the theory. But Dostoevsky pushes the experiment to its psychological conclusion, and the result is devastating. The crime does not elevate Raskolnikov, it fractures him. Guilt, paranoia, isolation. Crime crosses the line through destruction, but it cannot survive the consequences. There is a reason why this story continues to resonate. Have you ever wondered why so many people are fascinated by true crime stories? Why documentaries about murderers and criminals attract millions of viewers? Psychology suggests that part of the answer lies in something called benign transgression. We witness a moral violation, but from a safe distance. The crime is real, but we are not the victims. So the mind can wander and explore the violation without suffering its consequences. Stories of transgression become simulations. They allow us to explore the limits of the moral framework we inhabit. And Dostoevsky understood this perfectly. Psychology, instead of asking whether someone can stand above morality, it asks why some people believe they can. Researchers studying personality have identified a group of traits, sometimes called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Individuals high in these traits are far more likely to justify manipulating or exploiting others. Rules appear not as principles, but as obstacles. This helps explain why thinkers like Machiavelli could argue that rulers must sometimes violate morality to maintain power, and why figures like the Marquis de Sade push this logic even further. If nature itself is indifferent to suffering, then moral law might simply be a human invention. But psychology reveals that once someone starts believing that they are exceptional, rules begin to feel negotiable. This leads to another phenomenon psychologists call moral licensing. This is when someone feels entitled to do something bad or unaligned to a pre established ethical framework after doing something deemed as good. For instance, I worked out today, so it's okay to eat junk food tonight. I usually recycle, so this one time it's okay to litter. Or my favorite one, I am not racist, but it is as though our initial behavior provided us a kind of moral credit. A person who believes they serve a noble cause may excuse cruelty in its name. History is full of examples. Revolutionaries who justify violence, leaders who excuse oppression, even criminals who convince themselves that their victims somehow deserve what happened to them. Raskolnikov follows exactly this path. He convinces himself the pawnbroker's death might benefit humanity. But Dostoevsky reveals the flaw in the reasoning. The mind might rationalize transgression, but conscience does not disappear. It returns relentlessly. Crime is not the only way humans have attempted to cross the moral boundary. Another example appears in the work of Soren Kierkegaard. In Fear and Trembling, he explores one of the most disturbing stories in religious tradition. In the Christian Bible, God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son. The law says, "Thou shalt not kill." Yet, Abraham prepares to obey. For Kierkegaard, this moment reveals something extraordinary. Abraham does not reject morality, nor does he justify himself through historical success as Raskolnikov does with Napoleon. Instead, he enters what Kierkegaard calls the teleological suspension of the ethical, a paradoxical state in which obedience to God places the individual beyond the universal moral law. From the perspective of ethics, Abraham appears indistinguishable from a murderer. From the perspective of faith, he sublimates. Crime breaks the line through rebellion. Faith crosses it through trust in the absurd. Where Raskolnikov acts in pride, Abraham acts in humility. Where Raskolnikov seeks proof of superiority, Abraham renounces certainty altogether. This difference is crucial because Raskolnikov wants to become extraordinary, whereas Abraham becomes extraordinary precisely by not seeking it. And yet, the result is the same. Crime says, "I stand above morality." Faith says, "I obey something beyond morality." Both cross the line, but kind of in opposite directions.
Come down, get off your fucking terrace. We need the fucking space to nail the next fool mother.
Then comes Friedrich Nietzsche. He rejects both guilt and obedience. For him, the real question is deeper. What if morality itself is not sacred? What if it is simply one human system among many? In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he introduces the idea of the Übermensch. The higher human being does not simply reject values, he creates new ones. Creation does not merely cross the line, but it withdraws it entirely. Psychology offers an interesting insight here. Many revolutionary thinkers and artists share a personality trait, an openness to experience. People high in this trait tend to display intellectual curiosity, tolerance for ambiguity, and a willingness to question established structures. Where most people find security in rules, these people see possibilities. What distinguishes them is not just intelligence, it is the ability to imagine worlds that do not exist yet. But what does this actually look like in practice? Not in theory or philosophy, but in the work itself. Sometimes, when we search for figures who truly redraw the line, we don't always find rebellion in the way we expect. Some of the most profound acts of rebellion don't look like rebellion at all. Johann Sebastian Bach signed many of his compositions with three letters: SDG, Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone be the glory. At first glance, Bach might seem like the opposite of rebellion, a devout church musician working inside one of the most structured musical traditions in history. But if you look closer, Bach did not destroy the traditions that he inherited. He expanded them and pushed their boundaries to extraordinary levels of complexity. One of my favorite things about Bach's work is the idea behind signing SDG. At first glance, it might seem like an act of submission, a composer placing himself beneath a higher authority. But really, what he was doing, or rather, what he was not doing, was measuring his work against an audience or against fashion or recognition, not even against history. His only metric was the divine. And this has a strange consequence because when the work is oriented towards the idea of something infinite, it is no longer constrained by the expectations of the world. It no longer needs to justify itself socially or politically or even aesthetically in conventional terms. This allowed him to push the internal logic of his work to its limits, even while operating within the boundaries of one of the most constrained traditions of music of all time. This limitation and constraints became generative. Throughout history, people who claim to be revolutionaries often imagine that crossing the line requires destruction. Destroy the system, destroy institutions, destroy the structures that came before. Our own time is full of such rhetoric, calls to tear everything down, to burn the system, to dismantle the existing order. But history shows us over and over again that destruction alone has never been enough to build a new world. Breaking institutions may produce chaos, but chaos is merely absence of order. History shows us that True revolutionaries, the individuals who actually transform civilization, never do so through destruction alone. They do so through creation, new philosophies, new sciences, new music, new political ideas, new ways of understanding. Creation does something stranger than either crime or faith. Instead of merely violating an order, it gives form to a new one altogether. That is why I believe it to be the most brutal and unsettling form of transgression, because it reveals that the rules were never final to begin with. A new philosophy does not stab the old world. A new work of art does not argue with the old school. A new scientific vision does not insult what came before. At a certain point, each of these might make an older framework feel smaller or thinner or less capable of containing reality, and that is a far more profound kind of rebellion. Destruction still depends on the thing it opposes. It remains bound to it. It reacts against it. In a strange way, it is still obedient to its terms. Creation says there is more than the inherited structure, more than the sanctioned vocabulary, more than the moral and intellectual map a culture mistakes for the world itself. Which brings us back to the question that haunted Raskolnikov. Am I a trembling creature, or do I have the rights? Raskolnikov believed the right he sought was the right to destroy. But perhaps the question was misunderstood from the beginning. The greatest revolutionaries in history do not appear with fire in their hands. They appear with patience, with form, and with discipline.
Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather.